This is Duke University.
I'm very pleased to have Amory Lovins with us today in our Energy Speaker Series, which we launched. The Duke University Energy Initiative launched earlier this semester. We've had a great semester of speakers, and I'm really thrilled that we were able to get physicist Amory Lovins with us today to have a conversation. Amory's the co-founder, the chairman, and the chief scientist of the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is an independent nonprofit that drives the efficient use of resources. Amory has been an advisor to major firms and governments in over 50 countries for the past 4 decades. He's author of 31 books, over 450 publications, and has received prizes, honorary degrees, and awards that are simply too numerous for me to mention and list all of them, because I want to give Amory as much time as possible. His degrees are from Harvard and from Oxford, and he's taught at numerous universities, most recently at Stanford. In 2009, Time magazine named Amory one of the world's 100 most influential people, and Foreign Policy named him one of the 100 top global thinkers. His most recent books include Natural Capitalism, Small is Profitable, The Hidden Economic Benefits of Making Electrical Resources the Right Size, Winning the Oiled Endgame, and just released last year, and I think a principal focus of Amory's talk today, Reinventing Fire, Bold Business Solutions for the New Energy Era. Amory will speak for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we will open it up for discussion, ending at 11 o'clock, correct? Yes, 11 o'clock. Please join me in giving Amory a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Richard. Does this work? Well, let's see if I can get the inverse square law working. Is that better? No? What if I speak up? Does that work? Yeah. There's a gain control somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Let me ask you a question. Would you rather die of A, oil wars, or B, climate change, or C, nuclear holocaust, or D, all of the above, or E, none of the above? Sorry, that one tends to get left out. What if we could make energy do our work without working our undoing? Could we imagine fuel without fear? Could we reinvent fire? Fire made us human, fossil fuels made us modern, but now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. That's become possible. In fact, it works better and costs less than what we're doing now. So I'd like to visit with you about how to do that. 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning every year, a bit over 4 cubic miles of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. Those fossil fuels, I am obliged to tell you as a member of the National Petroleum Council, have built our civilization. They've created our wealth. They've enriched the lives of billions. They also have rising costs to our security, economy, health, and environment that are eroding, if not outweighing, their benefits. So we need a new fire. And switching from the old fire to the new fire is really about changing 2 big stories, oil and electricity, each of which puts about 2/5 of the fossil carbon in the air, but they're quite distinct. Our electricity comes less than 1% from oil, but nearly half from coal. 3/4 of our oil fuels transportation, and 3/4 of our electricity runs buildings. The rest of both runs factories. So very efficient vehicles, buildings, and factories save a lot of oil and coal, and they save natural gas that can displace both. But today's energy system is not just inefficient, it is also disconnected, aging, dirty, and insecure, so it needs refurbishment. By 2050, though, it could become efficient, connected, and distributed with elegantly frugal autos, factories, and buildings, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. We can thus eliminate our addiction to oil and coal by 2050 and use 1/3 less natural gas while switching to efficient use and renewable supply. We're used to thinking this might be really expensive, and that turns out not to be correct. By 2050, the transition I've just summarized to efficiency and renewables could cost $5 trillion less than business as usual in net present value, assuming that all externalities are valued at zero, a conservatively low estimate. Yet this cheaper energy system could support a 158% bigger U.S. economy, all without oil or coal, or for that matter, nuclear energy. Moreover, this transition needs no new federal taxes, subsidies, mandates, or laws, thus end running Washington gridlock. Let me say that again. I'm going to tell you how the United States can get completely off oil and coal by 2050, $5 trillion cheaper with no act of Congress led by business for profit. So this energy transition will be driven from the C-suite, not from K Street. It uses our most effective institutions, private enterprise, co-evolving with civil society, sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. And whether you most care about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or national security, or environmental stewardship and climate protection and public health, Reinventing Fire makes sense and makes money. Now, General Eisenhower reputedly said that enlarging the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by encompassing more options and synergies and degrees of freedom that its solution requires. So Reinventing Fire integrates all 4 energy-using sectors: transportation, buildings, industry, and electricity. And it integrates 4 kinds of innovation, not just technology and public policy, but also design and business strategy, which are much more powerful, and these combinations yield much more than the sum of the parts, especially in creating deeply disruptive business opportunities. In truth, we would save far more than $5 trillion. In this country, we're spending, for example, about $2 billion a day buying oil, but its hidden costs that we pay through our taxes and incomes not at the pump are at least $4 billion, or $1.5 trillion a year, in 3 roughly equal parts. The first $500 billion a year is sucked out of our economy mainly by OPEC's monopoly pricing that our oil dependence makes possible. The second $500 billion a year is the market value of oil's price volatility, which whipsaws our whole economy. For 40 years, oil price spikes have preceded every recession, but every day the yo-yoing oil price imposes that $500 billion a year of cost and risk on all oil users. And then the third $500 billion a year is the readiness costs to keep military forces prepared for Persian Gulf interventions. That is, by the way, 10 times what we pay for oil we buy from the Persian Gulf, and it rivals total U.S. defense spending at the height of the Cold War. Oil is also finite. The Pentagon is preparing not to need any of it, and the rest of us should too. we ought to be getting off oil just to be more secure and save money at the pump, even if its hidden price or hidden costs were not tripling the pump price in effect and raising the total cost of oil dependence to at least a sixth of GDP, not counting yet any costs to health, safety, environment, global development, and stability, or our nation's independence and reputation. So where to start? Our mobility fuel goes 3/5 to automobiles, so let's start by making autos oil-free. 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car is caused by its weight, and every unit of energy we save at the wheels by taking out weight or drag saves 6 more units you don't need to waste getting it to the wheels, so it saves 7 units of fuel at the tank. For the past quarter century, though, epidemic obesity has made our 2-ton steel autos gain weight twice as fast as we have. But today, ultralight, ultra-strong materials, notably carbon fiber composites, can make dramatic weight savings snowball and can make autos simpler and cheaper to build. Lighter and more slippery autos need less force to move them, so their engines get smaller. And indeed, this makes electric autos affordable through vehicle fitness because their batteries or fuel cells get smaller by 2- or 3-fold and lighter and cheaper. So their sticker price will fall to about today's level with far lower driving cost. These innovations can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of essentially Victorian engine and steel stamping technologies to the steeply falling costs of 3 mutually reinforcing sets of technologies in the ultralight materials, their manufacturing into structures, and electric propulsion. The sales can grow and prices can drop even faster with temporary fee-bates, that is, rebates for efficient new autos paid for by fees on inefficient ones. Just in the first 2 years, the biggest of 5 European fee-bate programs has tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency. The resulting shift to electric cars will be as game-changing as shifting from small refinements in typewriters to the dramatic Moore's Law-driven gains in computers. Of course, computers and electronics are now America's biggest industry, while typewriter makers have vanished. So vehicle fitness opens a new automotive competitive strategy that doubles the normally expected oil savings over the next 40 years and makes affordable the electrification that can save the other half of the oil. America could lead this next automotive revolution. The current leader, however, is Germany. Last year, Volkswagen announced this 230-mile-a-gallon carbon fiber plug-in hybrid for production next year. And BMW announced production next year of this carbon fiber electric car. They said its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries. And their CEO said, "We do not intend to be a typewriter maker," as he can look across Munich to where Olympia used to make excellent typewriters. Audi, by the way, claimed it will beat them both by a year. Now, fortunately, there are some good American technologies too. One of them, I think, better than what the German firms are using, was used 7 years ago to make in 1 minute this carbon cap, which you can tell from the sound is extremely strong and stiff. And I'll pass it around. Don't worry about dropping it. It's tougher than titanium. In fact, Tom Friedman whacked it as hard as he could with a sledgehammer and couldn't even scuff it. But techniques like that can scale to automotive speed and cost with aerospace performance. They can save 4/5 of the capital needed for automaking. They can save lives because this stuff absorbs 6 to 12 times as much crash energy per kilo as steel. And ultimately, they can save oil in U.S. auto market equivalent to discovering 1.5 Saudi Arabias or half an OPEC by drilling in the Detroit Formation, a very prospective play. Those nega barrels under Detroit would cost $18 a barrel, and they are inexhaustible, domestic, and carbon-free. The same physics and the same business logic also apply to big vehicles. In the 5 years through 2010, Walmart saved 60% of the fuel per ton mile in its fleet of heavy trucks. through better design and logistics. Just the better design, the better technology can save about 2/3 of heavy truck fuel. And when you combine that with the triple to quintuple efficiency airplanes now on the drawing boards, you're saving almost $1 trillion present value. Today's military revolution in energy efficiency will also speed up these oil savings in the civilian sector that uses 50-odd times more oil, much as military R&D in the past gave us the internet, global positioning system, and the jet engine and microchip industries. And where that can be headed is nega missions in the Persian Gulf, mission unnecessary. The warfighters really like that idea. Now, as we design and build vehicles better, we can also use them smarter. If this daily pattern of traffic congestion in the morning and evening rush hours were an electricity load shape, we would throw a lot of IT-enabled pricing and smart grid and demand response at it to try to flatten it out. But by not yet doing that for road traffic, we are wasting many billions of dollars a year in idle people, idle vehicles, and idle roads. But instead of just watching the vehicle miles traveled go up as projected, we have 4 very powerful ways now to reduce needless driving. We can charge for road infrastructure by the mile instead of by the gallon. We can use smart IT to enhance transit and empower car sharing and ride sharing. We can allow and encourage smart growth real estate models that are very lucrative for the developer and help people be where they want to be so they don't need to go somewhere else. And we can use IT to make traffic free flowing. So together those 4 proven methods can give us better access with 46 to 84% less driving, saving another $0.4 trillion plus $0.3 trillion from more productive use of trucks. So 40 years hence, a far more mobile U.S. economy can use no oil, saving or displacing each barrel for $25 rather than buying it for over $100 saves $4 trillion present value, counting again all of its hidden costs at zero. So to get mobility without oil, we can first get efficient and then switch fuels. We can start with the magenta savings baked into the official forecasts, then use better technology with integratively designed vehicles, use the vehicles more productively, and then the 125 to 240 mile per gallon equivalent autos don't need much to run them. Any mixture of hydrogen and electricity and advanced biofuels. The trucks and planes can realistically run on advanced biofuels or hydrogen, or the trucks could even burn natural gas, but no vehicles will need oil. Any biofuels that the U.S. might need, at most this orange 3 million barrels a day, 2/3 of it from waste, could be done without using any cropland and without harming soil or climate. Our team speeds up all these kinds of oil savings by what we call institutional acupuncture. We figure out where the business logic is congested, not flowing properly, and we stick little needles in it to get it flowing with partners like Ford and Walmart and the Pentagon. And in most of the 6 sectors that need to be transformed, I think this long transition is already very well underway. In fact, 3 years ago, analysts started to see peak oil not in supply but in demand, and Deutsche Bank even forecast that world oil use could peak around 2016. So oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. However, the electrified autos don't have to burden the electricity system. On the contrary, when smart vehicles exchange electricity and information through smart buildings with smart grids, they're adding to the grid valuable storage and flexibility that help to integrate solar and wind power. So electrified autos actually make the auto and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately, and they converge the oil story with our second big story, saving electricity and then making it differently. Those two revolutions in electricity promise more numerous and diverse and profound disruptions than in any other sector, because we've got 21st century technology and speed colliding head-on with 20th and 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Now, changing how we make electricity gets easier if we need less of it. Today, we're wasting most of it, and the technologies for saving it keep improving faster than they're being installed, so the unbought efficiency resource keeps getting bigger and cheaper. But as efficiency in buildings starts to grow faster than the economy, America's electricity use, instead of drifting along at 1% a year growth, could actually start shrinking by about 2% a year, or 1% a year after you take account of the extra electricity needed for those efficient electrified vehicles. And we could do this demand shrinkage by reasonably accelerating existing trends. Over the next 40 years, buildings, which you remember use 3/4 of our electricity, can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, saving $1.4 trillion net present value with an internal rate of return of 33%. That is, the savings are worth 4 times their cost. And industry can also accelerate, doubling its productivity with a 21% IRR. Making this possible is a disruptive innovation we call integrative design. This often makes very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how our 2010 retrofit is saving over 2/5 of the energy in the Empire State Building. Remanufacturing its 6,500 windows on site into super windows that pass light but block heat, plus better lights and office equipment and such, cut the maximum cooling load by 1/3, and then renovating smaller chillers instead of adding bigger ones saved $17 million of capital cost, helping to pay for the other improvements and cutting the payback to just 3 years. An even deeper retrofit we have underway right now at a big federal office complex in Denver is expected to make it the most efficient office building in the country cost effectively, even though it's a difficult 48-year-old building. That's how fast the state of the art is moving. My own house high in the Rocky Mountains, where it used to go to minus 47F, minus 44C, helped to inspire 32,000 European passive buildings that need no heating, but they have about normal construction cost, and they don't need to look like this to work like this. Now let's go into the central atrium. This is what it looked like a few weeks ago. This is banana crop number 37. Numbers 38 through 41 are around the corner. That's with no furnace. And in 1984, when I first moved in, this house was saving about 99% of its space and water heating energy, about 90% of its electricity, all with a 10-month payback. Today's technologies, which we've just retrofitted, are even better. Soon I'll know how much better, because we're commissioning software that's monitoring 300 data streams. Trouble is, the monitoring equipment seems to be using more energy than the lights and appliances. But this design approach works in any climate, including eliminating air conditioning up to 115F or 46C with lower construction cost and better comfort, or saving in Bangkok 90% of the air conditioning energy in a new house that cost exactly normal to build and has superior comfort. I think probably about everybody in the world lives in a climate somewhere between Old Snowmass and Bangkok. Now the key is integrative design that gives multiple benefits from single expenditures. This arch at the top, for example, has 12 functions but only one cost. Integrative design can also increase the $500 billion of conventional energy savings in industry, the kind that already gave Dow a $19 billion return on a $1 billion efficiency investment. For example, 3/5 of the world's electricity runs motors. Half of that runs pumps and fans, and those devices can be improved. Also, the motors that turn them, the motor systems, can save about half their energy by integrating 35 improvements with about a year's payback. But first, we ought to be capturing bigger, cheaper savings that are generally ignored and are not in the textbooks. For example, pumps, the biggest use of motors, move liquid through pipes, but a standard industrial pumping loop was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. That also shrinks the pumping equipment and its capital costs. So this isn't new technology, it's about rearranging our metal furniture to apply and combine better the technology that we have. So what does such savings mean for the electricity that's 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the coal burned in the power plant, there are so many compounding losses that only 1/10 of that energy actually comes out the pipe as flow. But if we turn those compounding losses around backwards into compounding savings, then every unit of flow or friction that we save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel cost, pollution, emissions, global weirding back at the power plant. And as you go back up upstream, excuse me, the components also get smaller and cheaper. Our team has lately found such snowballing energy savings in over $30 billion worth of industrial redesigns, from data centers and chip fabs to mines and refineries. Typically, our retrofit designs save about 30 to 60% of the energy with a 2 or 3 year payback, and our new facility designs save more, say 40 to 90 odd percent, with almost always lower capital cost. Of course, needing electricity would ease and speed the shift to new sources of electricity, chiefly renewables. China leads their explosive growth and their plummeting costs. Some of the Chinese photovoltaic module costs have just fallen off the bottom of the chart. Solar and wind power are often marketplace winners today, with bigger consequences. Europe, for example, has 1.1 million renewable jobs it didn't used to have. The big winner, Germany, has more solar workers than America has steel workers. Already in about 20 states, private installers will finance and install those solar modules to go on your roof with no money down and beat your utility bill. Within a few years, that'll be true essentially all over the country. And such unregulated products will ultimately add up to a virtual utility that could bypass power companies, just as cell phones bypassed wireline phone companies. This is the kind of thing that gives utility executives the heebie-jeebies and venture capitalists sweet dreams. Such competitive threats are real. This is not a fringe activity anymore. Half of the world's new generating capacity ever since 2008 has been renewable, and the majority of it lately in developing countries. In 2010, for example, renewables other than big hydro got $151 billion of private capital, and they surpassed the total installed global capacity of nuclear power by adding 60 billion watts. 60 billion watts happens to be the amount of capacity that the world can now manufacture in photovoltaics every year, and that number's been going up 60 or 70% a year. Last year, 2/3 of Europe's new capacity was solar and wind power, with solar ahead for the first time. Now, in contrast, the net capacity additions shown here for nuclear, similarly for coal, the orders for both have been fading because they have too much cost and too much financial risk to attract investors. In this country, for example, we've now had almost 7 years of 100+% construction subsidies on offer for 34 new nuclear projects, not one of which was able to raise a penny of private construction capital because they have no business case. So how else would we replace the coal-fired capacity that makes almost half our electricity? Well, efficiency and gas can displace all the coal plants at below just their operating cost, and combined with renewables could displace all the coal capacity 23 times or more at less than its replacement cost, but we only need to replace it once. We're often told, though, that only coal and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, whereas wind and photovoltaics are variable and hence supposedly unreliable. But actually no generator is 24/7, they all break. And when a giant plant breaks, you lose typically 1,000 megawatts in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. Fortunately, the grid is designed to handle that intermittence by replacing failed plants with working ones. And the grid can cope with the forecastable variations of solar and wind output in exactly the same way. But hourly simulations show very clearly that largely or wholly renewable grids can deliver highly reliable power when they are forecasted and integrated and diversified both by type and by location. This is true both for continental areas like the US or Europe and for smaller areas embedded within a larger grid. For example, the isolated Texas grid summer load shape can be made smaller and less peaky by profitable efficiency, and then we can add wind power and solar power, and even though at times they will together produce more or less power than required, they can be matched to the load via ice storage air conditioning, smart charging and discharging of electric vehicles, and unobtrusively flexible demand, even with, in this case, 86% of the electricity annually coming from solar and wind power. And the other 14% or less can come from dispatchable renewables like geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, or feedlot biogas burned in existing gas turbines. Now, some utilities already do this choreography, integrating variable renewables. 4 German states in 2010, for example, were 43 to 52% wind powered. Portugal was 45% renewable powered, Denmark 36%. And now European experience is supporting a transition over decades to largely or wholly renewable electricity for the whole European Union. In America, our aging, dirty, and insecure electricity system essentially all has to be replaced anyway by 2050. Whatever we replace it with is going to cost about $6 trillion net present value, whether we buy more of what we've got, or new nuclear and so-called clean coal, or renewables, more centralized or more distributed. But those 4 futures differ profoundly in their risks around national security, fuels, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. For example, our over-centralized grid is vulnerable to cascading and potentially economy-shattering blackouts caused by bad space weather, other natural disaster, or attack. But that blackout risk disappears, and all the other risks are best managed with distributed renewables reorganized into local microgrids that normally interconnect but can stand alone at need, disconnecting fractally and recombining seamlessly. At about the same cost as business as usual, this would maximize security, customer choice, entrepreneurial opportunity, and innovation. Together, efficient use and diverse distributed renewable supply are starting to transform the whole electricity system. Traditional utilities built giant coal and nuclear plants and a bunch of big gas plants and maybe a little bit of efficiency in renewables. Those utilities were rewarded, as they still are in 36 states, including this one, for selling you more electricity. But now, especially where regulators instead reward cutting your bills, the market is shifting massively towards efficiency, demand response, renewables, cogeneration, and ways to combine them all reliably with less transmission and little or no bulk electricity storage. So our energy future is not fate but choice, and that choice is very flexible. In 1976, for example, government and industry all agreed that the amount of energy needed to make a dollar of GDP could never go down. I heretically suggested it could decrease several-fold. That's what happened, by twofold so far. Yet today's far more powerful technologies and integrative design and maturing delivery channels can now save another factor 3 on our energy intensity. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it. The results may at first seem incredible, but as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries are protected by public incredulity. Now, combine the electricity and oil revolutions, both driven by strong efficiency, and you have the really big story, Reinventing Fire, where the savings in or extrapolated from the official forecasts are augmented by newer, better technologies and integrative design and productive use of vehicles. The renewables are quintupled, and therefore the nuclear, coal, and oil phase out. And this is what happens when business, enabled and sped by smart policies and mindful markets, can lead us completely off oil and coal by 2050, save $5 trillion, grow the economy 2.6-fold, improve our security, and by eliminating oil and coal, by the way, reduce fossil carbon emissions by 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any of those outcomes, any one or more of them will do, you can support Reinventing Fire without needing to like all of the outcomes and without needing to agree about which outcome is most important. So if we focus on outcomes, not motives, we can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to America's energy challenge. These best buys also happen to be the most effective solutions to big global problems like climate change and nuclear proliferation and energy insecurity and energy poverty. Now, at RMI, our team helps smart companies to get unstuck and to speed this journey via 6 sectoral initiatives with some more hatching. Of course, there is still a lot of old thinking out there too. As Oilman Marie Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But DuPont's former chairman, Edgar Woolard, reminds us that firms hampered by old thinking won't be a problem because, he said, they simply won't be around long term. What I've described here is not just a once-in-a-civilization business opportunity. It's one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species. We humans are inventing a new fire, not dug from below, but flowing from above, not scarce but bountiful, not local but everywhere, not transient but permanent, not costly but free. And but for that transitional tail of natural gas and a little biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless. Efficiently used, it really can do our work without working our undoing. Each of you owns a piece of that $5 trillion prize, and our new book, Reinventing Fire, details how each of you can capture that opportunity. So with the conversation just begun at reinventingfire.com, I would invite you to join with us at RMI and engage with each other and all those around you to help make the world richer, fairer, cooler, and safer by together reinventing fire. Thank you.
I don't need to monitor the questions, but I'm going to...
As you think best.
So we have a good amount of time for questions. We have a microphone here. So please, if you would, if you have a question, come up to the microphone so we can all hear. And if you could introduce yourself as well, that'd be great. Thank you.
Maddox, Fayetteville State University. I heard you say that one can do without air conditioning up to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. How would you go about that here in this climate, for example, where it's also humid?
The examples of ordinary-looking tract houses at 113 and 115F were in much drier climates, although not nearly as dry as they used to be. They're in California around Davis and Stanford Ranch, and you may know around Davis because of all the irrigation, there's considerable humidity now, but it's not as muggy as here. And those were part of the PG&E Act Squared experiment. And my ASHRAE centenary speech that's on our website called the Super Efficient Passive Building Frontier describes how, or I can tell you how offline. But if you were doing it in this climate, you'd have broadly two choices. One is to use adaptations with super windows and such of traditional architecture with natural ventilation, verandas, and so on, which actually used to produce passive comfort in Bangkok before the city got so hot. And I've seen it do the same in northern Australia 3 days before the monsoon. It's quite remarkable. Your other choice would be to use a small solar-driven desiccant to knock off the latent load. And actually, if you want to go fully mechanical, if you put in a Pennington or Van Zyl cycle with desiccant plus direct-indirect evap, that'll do the job anywhere in the world with as much comfort as you want. But with very little electricity, you can get over 100 units of cooling per unit of electricity that way instead of a few. And I actually think it's probably feasible, and we'll find out, I hope this year, to do zero electricity air conditioning using a combination of that approach and some biomimetic techniques for pulling back water out of the air so you don't have water logistics.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Jim Salzman. I teach at the law school in the School of the Environment here. I went to a talk of yours, it must be 10 or 15 years ago, and at the time you were very excited about flywheel technology for cars. It was on the cover of, I remember you showed us some covers, I forget which magazine it was. And I was wondering if you could talk about that or some other examples of innovations that you've been sharing that haven't been widely adopted, and some of the lessons you've taken. It obviously goes beyond fossils.
No, I think I would probably have said at the time that flywheels were one very promising method of energy and especially power storage aboard vehicles, and they still are, although some non-commercial or let's say non-technical accidents that happen to a couple of the leading technologies and companies have kept them from doing as well as they deserve to. However, it hardly matters because through advanced batteries, which I understand from ARPA-E have just gotten another factor 2 better, and ultracapacitors, we have plenty of good energy and power storage technologies. The key is to need less of that stuff and fewer fuel cells by taking weight and drag out of the vehicle. Our federal policy has been to try to make the electric powertrain components cheaper first so we could sell a lot. However, I think it makes more sense to need fewer of them by doing vehicle fitness first, and then you sell a lot because the vehicle becomes affordable, and feebates, by arbitraging the discount rate spread between private buyers and society, can bridge the initially higher cost over the first decade or two as needed. But then you end up selling a lot, so it gets cheaper anyway. You get to the same place with less time, cost, and risk. I'd have to go back to earlier writings to figure out what I thought would be hot that isn't. And there's probably some of those, but the portfolio is so huge it hardly matters. And fortunately, I don't pick winners and losers. I just like competition. And it's like with the fuel for the advanced light vehicles, I don't have any idea who's going to win in the competition between electricity, hydrogen fuel cells, and advanced biofuels, but any one will do. All three work, and competition will be robust. That's good.
Tina Reitel. I'm a student here at the Nick School. I was wondering if you could talk in a little bit more detail about how the cost of a vehicle will go down as it lightens its weight, because from my understanding, most of the automobile makers today are really going for the aluminum and the magnesium versus the carbon composite material, but also it's just there's some concern with the energy needed to create the carbon composite, as well as
there shouldn't be if you do the math right.
Okay.
And without even counting the fortuitous fact that the carbon fiber composites do not dent or rust or fatigue, so they last indefinitely, and that means you can actually think about a whole different business model, more like an airframe, where you have a durable structure that gets refreshed with cosmetics and powertrain and such, but the underlying structure is still the same 50 years later. Maybe you lease that instead of selling the vehicle. Yes, most of the automotive lightweighting taking place in current market offerings uses light metals. However, although those have traditionally raised cost and therefore have made sense only in other countries that pay 3 or 4 times as much for fuel as we do, several things are changing. First of all, a few years ago, a major U.S. automaker in a study I co-led for the first time asked, how much of that light metal lightweighting can you pay for by downsizing the powertrain to get the same acceleration as when you started? This is a fairly elementary level of design integration, but it gave quite a startling result, which now has production intent. Second, we now have about 17 firms offering equipment to make advanced composite structures, and that is not something that the auto industry traditionally knows very much about, except that they know it's very slow and expensive the way they make Formula One cars, which is hand layup and autoclave, and you need 1,000 times higher volume and lower cost for series production of autos. However, those technologies do exist now. I passed around an example that could do a 1-minute cycle time 7 years ago, actually one of our spin-offs that's active in this area and in which to declare an interest, I'm a tiny shareholder, so I used to chair the company, has a lot of automotive activity now. The main fallacy, I think, or two fallacies, you might call them strange behaviors, that have made this harder to see than it should have been for many automakers until quite recently, are easily described and not very easily fixed. The first is that they have tended to view cost by the part or by the pound, but you don't buy cars that way, you buy them by the car. And therefore it's been harder to see that it's okay to spend more on the body in black in order to spend less on the whole vehicle. But in fact, as we have now nailed down with very granular production economics data from Glenn Mercer, who used to run McKinsey's automotive practice, you get about a factor 5 capital saving when you go to an all-advanced composite structure, because you need 98 or 99% less tooling cost. You get rid of the body shop and most or all of the paint shop. Those are the 2 costliest and hardest steps in making the car. And the powertrain gets about 2/3 smaller, so when you add all that up, it pays for the carbon fiber. And therefore, the ultralighting is free at, say, mid-volume. The second problem is even tougher. It's, again, a cultural, not a technological or economic issue. These very capable, complex organizations have tended to count their sunk costs as unamortized assets. So they've tended to make strategic decisions based on accounting, not economics, as if it were better to write off obsolete assets later when you don't have a company than now when you do. So they've just had to do that on a massive scale. Fortunately, they more or less survived the experience, and that near-death experience has concentrated the mind wonderfully. So in at least 2 of those companies, the strategic thinking is now evolving very rapidly. 2006 to 9, I was the anchor tenant on Bill Ford's Transformation Advisory Council. I'm very pleased with what's coming out of that. Watch this space. And there's a similarly encouraging stuff going on at one of the other big OEMs in this country. So I think we're on the path to mending the cultural flaws. I can now count from our work in the industry between 3 and 7 automakers, starting with BMW, that have adopted or are in course of adopting the strategy I described. It only takes one, because once you start harnessing those 3 strongly synergistic learning curves compared to, say, just one for hybrids, it's very hard for others to catch up. So I think we have finally turned the corner in this cultural change, but there's a lot of very hard work to do still, and I don't know which companies are going to succeed. I can only mention as a benchmark that in 2007, Toyota showed the 1X, 1 over X, concept car, which has the interior volume of a Prius, half the fuel use, and 1/3 the weight, 420 kilos curb weight for a 4 to 5 passenger plug-in hybrid. If it were an ordinary hybrid like a Prius, it would be 400 kilos, which happens to be what I was saying in 1991 a good 4-seat carbon car should weigh, to much hilarity from the industry. But that is now the benchmark, and I don't think they did it for amusement. In fact, by arrangement, the day before they released it at the Tokyo Auto Show, Toray, the world's biggest maker of carbon fiber, which is boosting its output 50% in the next 3 years, announced a $0.3 billion factory in Nagoya to mass produce carbon fiber car parts for Toyota. Not a phrase previously much heard in the industry. Teijin is on the same track. Those two plus Zoltech have automotive advanced composite centers. The Japanese and I believe German governments have automotive advanced composite centers. Yeah, there's a whole lot going on, a lot of it behind the curtain, but I think you'll be pleased with what happens. And as I mentioned, 3 German automakers have announced production of carbon fiber electrified cars by next year. That's, I think, a good indication there's something real happening.
Hi, my name is Maura. I'm a student at the Nicholas School here. Given a lot of the obvious benefits of energy efficiency, what do you see as some of the strongest barriers to adoption, both in the private sector and in the individual level?
Well, there's a long list of those. There's 60 or 80 well-known market failures in buying efficiency, and actually in the 4 sectoral chapters, we discuss those in some depth, and then at the end of each chapter there's a table of who needs to do what at 3 levels of adventurousness. I mentioned 2 of the really big ones, that utilities in 36 states are still rewarded for selling you more electricity, not for cutting your bill. That's just as dumb as a possum, and we got to stop doing it. And second, that typically when you buy a new automobile, whether to get an efficient one is about as important an economic decision for you as whether to buy floor mats, because you're only looking at the first year or 2 of fuel saving owing to your very high implicit consumer discount rate. And fee-baits solve that problem and let you apply a societal discount rate and look at the full 15 years of fuel savings. There are lots of others. For example, we pay our architects and engineers for what they spend, not for what they save. So performance-based design fees would be very helpful, and it doesn't take any legislation to do that. It's between consenting adults. The design professionals or their clients can start bidding or requiring that, and some are. You can look hard at design education. Why do we not teach the big pipes, small pumps, and lay out the pipes first, then the equipment stuff to our pipe fitters, let alone our engineering students? You can look at the design tools. We're working with Autodesk to put integrative design into their software, which is on 2 million screens designing stuff that touches 2 billion people. I like that kind of leverage. There are big financial barriers, especially in today's broken capital markets, but between PACE bonds, which are working in the commercial sector where the indescribably misled federal regulator has barred it for residential so far. It's going to take a legislative solution. But between PACE bonds and new stuff like a efficiency service agreement that's like a power purchase agreement for megawatts, there are quite important innovations emerging, and several states now have even legislated on-bill financing, which basically applies a utility discount rate to fixing up your building or your factory. It's a very long list, but to resolve these, we basically need to pay attention, get informed, and do what's right in front of us. One of my favorite examples, which you'll find in the book, is we figured out back in '94 that a certain 200,000 square foot curtain wall office tower near Chicago could be retrofitted to save 3/4 of its energy at a slightly lower cost than the regular 20-year renovation they had to do anyway that saves nothing. It was approved for construction by the owner, which was the biggest fiduciary owner of commercial property in the country, but then it wasn't done. It was stopped by the leasing broker who controlled the property and was short of cash and incentivized on deal flow. Now, this illustrates the complexity of busting the barriers, because there are 24 or so parties in the commercial real estate value chain, all speaking different languages, and with stunning perfection, they are systematically rewarded for inefficiency and penalized for efficiency. So each of them is a business opportunity, but each can be a showstopper, and neither we nor the owner paid enough attention to the role of that leasing broker, so we didn't discover it till it was too late. Of course, in the end, nobody wanted to lease the property, so it had to be sold off to a bottom feeder at a distressed price. But actually, we should go back to that one. I think Sam Zell ended up with it, and in another few years, it'll need reglazing again. So the opportunity will come up again. Maybe he'll want to make something of it. And if you go to retrofitdepot.org, you'll find some good tools for evaluating commercial property portfolios. So complex issues, lots to do, lots to keep you all busy for several careers. I think the kind of broad education you get in the Nicholas School is a very good grounding in how to do that, but you'll have to pick up other stuff, whether it's industrial engineering or real estate finance or whatever.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we need to end this formal session, but I know that Amory has some time in between this and his next thing, so we'll have time to answer questions. That's it. One last question.
Hi, I'm Amy Kochanowski. I'm a Master of Public Policy student. You outlined a really great potential, and even if people are aware of these kinds of savings without any kind of government, federal interventions or subsidies, what are going to be the driving factors that really encourage businesses to go away from business as usual and start looking at some things to get us to this potential?
Well, as I mentioned, I think this will be driven from the C-suite, and it may be the CFO, not the CEO. It may be the chief engineer. It can come from a lot of different places, and it can also come bottom up, which is where Dow started its work with Dan Nelson in Dow, Louisiana on the shop floor level to enculturate what is now a $19 billion saving, and more to come. This often requires leadership at several levels within the organization. And in fact, what Dan Nelson did was not even tell the boss what was going on, because then it would turn into committees and bureaucracies and slogans rather than actually choosing and executing projects. And he didn't pay his engineers a special reward for coming up with savings, because he didn't want them to think that wasn't part of their job. He did recognize them in other ways. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, but I'm describing basically a cultural change process that is not all that different from introducing Six Sigma or safety culture or any other major change in how organizations work. We do have a lot of evidence now, including Dow, that once you create a culture of innovation, measurement, curiosity, the engineers tend to learn new tricks faster than they use up the old ones, so the savings and the returns on the investment both tend to keep going up rather than petering out. Also, there are, just to make clear, some important policy innovations needed, and I've outlined some of them like fee-bates or decoupling and shared savings, but it turns out they can all be done either administratively, like FERC's work for requiring pricing transparency and fair competition in the wholesale grid, or they can be done at a state level. We found nothing that required an act of Congress, with one trivial exception, and that is if you didn't ultimately harmonize federal with state rules to allow long compound trucks, you would give up in the long run about 0.3 million barrels a day of fuel savings, but since that's only a tenth of the total biofuel need, which is quite small, we didn't think that was a very important loss if that's what happened.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.